All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's edition of Total Attorneys Power Chat. We'll be speaking with Stephanie Kimbro, who is the foremost expert on virtual law practice and the unbundling of legal services. Her book was recently published by the ABA, Virtual Law Practice, How to Deliver Legal Services Online. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today. A couple housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have questions during the session, you can email powerchat@totalattorneys.com. If you have technical issues during the session, you can email powerchathelp@totalattorneys.com, and someone on our side will be happy to assist you. You can follow us on Twitter @totalattorneys and use the hashtag PowerChat to follow tweets of our session today. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie. We are really excited to hear all of your insights and advice around this very popular topic lately. I think the legal industry is going through this massive and very rapid evolution in handling all of these new technologies and new ways that clients want to work with us, and the need that clients have is also changing, and the services that they're seeking are changing. So I'm going to hand it over to you. We're going to go through a few different sessions today, and we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate the opportunity. Unbundling seems to be enjoying a renewal of interest in the legal profession, partly because of consumer need and also because we now have technology that lets us unbundle a lot faster and reach out to a lot more of the public than we could before. So what I want to talk about today is just provide you with a basic introduction to unbundled legal services. What are they? How do you unbundle? What are the different structures and ways that you can integrate this into your practice, whether it's a traditional brick-and-mortar practice, a solo practice, or a larger firm, or a virtual law office. Then I want to, of course, address the ethical considerations, look at the model rules, and discuss what the different states, how they're taking approaches to unbundling, and then talk about best practices for how to do this responsibly in your own practice. So let's just start out with introduction to what are legal services and who is the do-it-yourself client. Unbundled legal services are also called limited scope representation, or LSR, a la carte legal services, or discrete task representation. You may have heard of these different terms, but what they all mean is that you're taking a legal matter for a client and you're breaking it down into separate components. And you as the attorney are only going to represent the client on one or two of those tasks within the larger legal matter. And the client themselves is responsible for doing the footwork to complete their legal needs on their own. So there's a very clear responsibility that's given to the client with unbundled legal services. And to give you an idea of some sample services that you could unbundle, I've got a list here. Ghostwriting means you're writing the pleading for a pro se litigant, and they're actually the ones that are going to take it, file it with the court, and attend the hearings and follow through with that. And there are different rules state by state based on ghostwriting and whether the attorney has to disclose authorship. And we'll talk about that a little more when we get to the ethics part of this presentation. But I think there's sort of a misperception that unbundling is nothing more than document creation and document drafting, and I kind of wanted to put this list up to sort of dispel that myth. There are a lot of different ways you could take the services that you do in your traditional firm and unbundle them to help the certain kind of client that needs those services. So you might provide coaching or strategy, role playing for the pro se litigant. You might advise them on court procedures and courtroom behavior, how to compose themselves at a hearing or a trial. You could make limited appearances for them if you have a practice where you are that's litigation based. You may go in and represent them on only a particular matter within a presentation before the court. Negotiating, conducting legal research and giving them that information. providing legal guidance or opinions, just basic guidance. And then collaborative lawyering too, which is real popular in the family law practice area, which is where the parties agree that we're not going to go to court over this. We're going to find ways to settle this among ourselves. There are ways to unbundle in all these different situations. So is there a market for unbundling? That's what I am asked a lot. I think you just have to look at who our clients are now and the changes that we're seeing in society in terms of how we serve ourselves, how we look for business, how we find business, and then what level of control we want over it. We are in a do-it-yourself society. If you notice, most of the grocery stores now have the self-serve checkout lines. We're all about self-service. We want to retain some control because we realize in most cases that if we do a little bit of the footwork, it's going to be more affordable for us. And especially in this economy, people are willing to make that trade-off to do a little of their own footwork. And I think consumers, too, associate that do-it-yourself product with a lower cost, a more affordable, convenience. So it's appealing to them. And that's why this market is growing. And then you have the online legal service companies, such as LegalZoom, who have been marketing for years now to consumers, making them aware of these do-it-yourself legal service options. NoLowLaw.com is another option, U.S. Legal Forms. There's a number of these online legal service companies now, and they provide the consumer with those forms, legal forms, but they're not necessarily with attorney review. Now that model is changing, and they're starting to add the attorney review component to it. But the idea is that the public, the consumer, has already been educated for several years now. You know, Robert Shapiro gets on with the LegalZoom ads and lets them know, hey, this is an affordable way to get your legal needs met. So it's really something that they're looking for. They're going online and looking for unbundled services. And wondering, too, you know, where are the legal professionals in this? Because we can shop online, we can bank online, we can earn degrees online. Why can't I have a name change handled online? Why can't I, you know, work through my legal needs in the same manner? So some reasons why consumers would choose unbundled services, and I think this is important because this will help you understand what type of client you will be interacting with if you choose to offer these type of services. They're more of the client that wants to retain some control over their matter. And I think that if you take the client's perspective and you realize that legal services for your clients are deeply, in most cases, deeply personal. This is their life, is this legal matter that's going on. It's consuming their every thought. It's very important to them. And so it's important to them to retain some kind of control over it, whether it's just keeping, you know, actually having that document in their hands and taking it to the courthouse, or you know, standing up for themselves and representing themselves in certain portions of it. They want to retain that control. It may also be individuals who can't afford full-service traditional legal representation. And I don't want to convey the myth that all unbundled clients are necessarily folks of lower to moderate means. There is an enormous market there for those types of individuals, but unbundling can be, you know, with any number of type of clients and client services, not necessarily those that are pro se litigants or who are of lower means and can't afford legal representation. But there is a huge market here of individuals who, especially in this economy, can't afford billable hour, traditional full service representation, yet they don't qualify for legal aid assistance. So there's an opportunity with unbundling to work with this huge number of individuals and kind of fill that gap in access to justice. The consumers are looking for flexibility and convenience with unbundled services. They don't want to have to make 5 or 6 in-person, in the office appointments to meet with the attorney or the paralegal. They need the flexibility. Perhaps they're working 2 jobs, or they're working, they have children, they can't afford child care, or they don't want to take time off work, can't afford to. It gives them more flexibility to handle it in their own time, what they need to, and to work with the attorney as well around that schedule. The unbundled services lend themselves really well to alternative fee arrangements, such as fixed fee or value billing. And we find, too, in this economy that folks really appreciate being able to budget for their legal needs. So rather than getting the sticker shock of an invoice after they work with the attorney, they're getting upfront, this is what you're going to have to pay, payment plans. Because when you do unbundled services, you're defining very specifically the scope of the work that you're going to do for that client and what they're responsible for. So you're able to more easily put a fixed fee on that scope. And so it just lends itself really well. And that being able to budget for services is appealing to this do-it-yourself consumer. Because it's more affordable for them, fits within their budget, and it's what they're seeing online with the online legal service companies. When they go to compare what they could handle online, they're seeing those fixed fees. So some of these individuals may also be more comfortable maybe just seeing the attorney once, or maybe just working with the attorney online through a virtual office rather than a traditional law firm setting. There may be some level of intimidation walking into a traditional firm. Some levels of distrust with attorneys. These folks may be more comfortable this way. And then, two, geographic challenges, or maybe the individuals are disabled, or for whatever reason they're not able to come into the city to meet with an attorney. They live in more remote areas. So unbundling lets them handle those matters on their own when they can, but with the guidance of an attorney handling a specific component of their legal needs. So what are the benefits of unbundling? We kind of talked about this a little. For the public, greater access to the legal system. So especially for folks of lower to moderate means, it's filling that gap that we have right now. It's also helping to lessen the burden on our court systems, who have been for years now overburdened with a number of pro se litigants who are going through the system that the courts have to handle. And if they have the chance to go to an attorney who will guide them through a part of that process, it really will lessen the burden on our system, our court systems. For the professionals, if you choose to do unbundling in your practice, then it really gives you a way to acquire a different client base, a unique client base that's looking for a different form of legal services, and to tap into potentially that latent market for the online legal services that are looking for unbundled. So it gives you an opportunity to expand your services, to maybe tap into a new market, and also, too, I think to provide your existing full-service clients with some unbundled options. And we'll talk about that in a minute, how you might want to structure that type of delivery. So there's two different ways you could unbundle in terms of whether the delivery is online or offline practice. So online, the benefits of that are, your clients can access their case files 24/7. And why this is beneficial is I mentioned that a lot of times the unbundled client, the more of the do-it-yourself client, is really someone that needs to retain more control over their legal matter, very close to it emotionally. Well, they can go online anytime, 24/7, and check on the status of their case, review your threaded discussion, review the documents you've sent them, the instructions, the checklists. So they have that, and it's sort of a sense of comfort and control to be able to go online and do that at any hour of the day or night. And then attorneys, too, you have that online case and client management tool, so you can, from the back end, provide them with the guidelines and checklists that they'll need to carry on the representation themselves. So you have all that online, and it's just easier access for them. And then an online unbundled practice can really make use a lot better of the different document automation and assembly tools that are out on the marketplace now. And some of these are integrated into other web-based practice management systems, or they're separate systems that you can adopt and use. And this is something that even with an offline practice, you can buy something like Hot Docs or create your own templates and in-house. But when it's online, there's a lot more streamlining of the unbundled process that takes place in terms of client intake forms that can be automated. Really makes it much more cost-effective for the attorney to unbundle because the technology is doing a lot of that administrative prep work for the delivery of the unbundled client. However, if you are going to do unbundling online, you have to realize that there are certain best practices, not only for unbundling, but of online delivery. So there's a separate set of ethics issues and best practices you'll have to be sure you understand how to follow when you do that. So offline, the benefit of offline unbundling is that it lends itself to much more, many more practice areas where you could unbundle because online has restrictions in terms of let's say you wanted to, an elder law practice, for example. Those kinds of clients, you're going to need to meet with them in person if they're not comfortable with the technology or going online. So if it's an offline practice, you can do more litigation-based unbundling. You can make limited court appearances. You can do more coaching or strategy role-playing with the client in person in the office than you could with an online one. It can't be as streamlined or automated when it's an offline practice versus using the technology to kind of not have to reinvent the wheel each time and reuse it for each unbundled case. So just talk about a couple of the methods, technologies that can be used to create the unbundling. There's document automation and assembly products. And so what this is you have a new unbundling client that comes to you. You can set up all these templates ahead of time so that rather than you having to make an appointment with them and walk through the client intake process, you can set up these automated forms that are like intuitive forms where the client answers yes to something, it prompts them with the next question that's appropriate or no, and it moves them to the next one. And they work through that themselves on their own time. Then you get that, and then you're able to take it, review it, and go back to them with more questions or come to them with a limited scope engagement agreement. But it really does let you work through ahead of time more of those routine aspects of unbundling. And then pull the information the client gives you into a template that you can either provide to them that they can purchase right away or purchase with in addition to other guidance or help from you. So a lot of different flexibility in how you can use this type of technology. And then this is what I do is I have a virtual law firm. So this is a way for me to deliver unbundled legal services online and sort of streamline that process. So a virtual law firm is basically it's a professional law practice that's located online. So I have a secure client portal, so my prospective unbundled clients will register for a unique username or password, they'll log in, and then they will request legal services, and we'll go from there with a click wrap agreement that is my limited scope engagement agreement, and through that process. But everything's handled online for me, so the technology is really how I unbundle and how I deliver the unbundled services online. And if you're you may have heard some other terms to define a virtual law firm, VLOs, virtual lawyering, web-based or web-enabled practice, online law practice. This pretty much means the same thing. It's the delivering of legal services from the establishment of the attorney-client relationship through to the rendering and payment of the unbundled legal services. So those are different ways to use technology to deliver unbundled services. So let's move on to part 2, which is a very critical component, which is the ethics considerations, and look at the different model rules that have set this up. So before, of course, you even consider unbundling in any type of firm structure, you want to check with your state bar to make sure that you understand their rules for unbundling and any ethics opinions that they have about that. So ABA Model Rule 1.2c is really the model rule, which was revised in 2002, that allows for unbundling. And it says that a lawyer may limit the scope of representation if the limitation is reasonable under the circumstances and the client gives informed consent. So this rule is the rule that's been either adopted or modified by almost all the states since it was added to the model rules. And then the question then becomes, of course, what is reasonable. We'll talk about that in a second. The other formal opinion that the ABA has published that relates to unbundling is 07446, and that's the one that permits ghostwriting. And what that is the ABA's ethics opinion said that, okay, an attorney can provide unbundled. They can work with a pro se litigant and write this pleading for them, and they don't have to disclose to the court the attorney wrote it. And this is where the state bar really differs with the different state bars differ a lot on unbundling is on ghostwriting. Some state bars require that ghostwritten materials have the disclosure of attorney authorship in them. And the background on this is that when a pro se litigant comes before a court, there's a certain amount of leniency that's given by the judge and the opposing counsel to that pro se litigant because he or she does not have a law license. However, if that pro se litigant has had the assistance of an attorney in drafting that document, then the question is, do they deserve the same amount of leniency as they would get if they were completely on their own without that guidance? And so some states believe that no, they don't. The court needs to know that the document and the strategy behind it comes from a licensed professional so that they can adjust their expectations accordingly. So again, check with the different state bars about ghostwriting and what is required before you embark on that. So back to Model Rule 1.2c, defining reasonable. So how do you know if it's going to be, this unbundling is going to be reasonable or not? Well, the courts have found that limited scope representation is reasonable when the client's rights and interests are not harmed and when the attorney hasn't committed any ethics violations from limiting that scope. So how do you decide if it's going to be in your client's best interests or their rights aren't going to be harmed? And that, actually, we'll talk about that more in best practices, but what that comes down to is you have to look at the legal matter that the client is requesting that you handle unbundled and consider whether that matter, the client would be better off having a full service representation where the representation is ongoing and continuous because of the complexity. So for example, criminal defense work or complex litigation or complex child custody matter. Those kind of issues, it would probably not be in the client's best interest if the attorney is only representing them for a portion of that and then they're on their own for the rest. That continuous and ongoing representation is going to be what's in their best interest. And the best practices will I'll show you in this next section how to actually ask the right questions of the client to determine whether it's going to be in their best interest to unbundle or not, whether it will be reasonable. So the other key component of the ethics part is limiting the scope of representation, and this is key with unbundled legal services because the attorney needs to clearly define what will be the responsibility of the attorney and what will be the responsibility of the client. Those expectations need to be set from the very beginning so there's no misunderstandings later down the line as to how much work the attorney was supposed to do for the client on a particular matter. And the way that you limit the scope and set this up is through a limited scope engagement agreement. And now we'll move to best practices where I'll talk about how you create this limited scope engagement agreement, how you decide whether it's going to be reasonable to unbundle a specific case or not. So can this case be unbundled? The first thing you want to think about is, okay, how complex is this matter? And to do that, you want to thoroughly ask questions of the prospective unbundled client, questions that will help you to identify any collateral issues that may come up later on down the line in the case. And you can do that through the use of client intake forms, whether they're online or in person. But you really want to vet out all those potential collateral issues that may come up. That will help you understand the complexity. Then you want to ask, is the client's personality suited to this type of model delivery? Do they have the education and the ability to take what you've given them and complete it? In some cases, do they have the education level necessary to follow your instructions? And again, looking at the practice area that they're asking for legal services in, is it going to be better if it's a representation that's ongoing and continuous, or and in that case they may need full service representation, or can you really break down these tasks and they can complete them on their own? Does the client take instruction well? Did they go to, for example, did they go to an attorney for full service representation first, and now they're coming to you for unbundled? So for whatever reason, they weren't able to work with another attorney, because sometimes that might be the case. Are they going to be comfortable communicating with you in the way that the firm has set up for limited scope cases? So for example, in order for you as the firm owner to make this cost effective, you have to communicate using your virtual law office, or encrypted email, or you can only meet with an in-person once. The rest has got to be handled via web conference or phone conference or whatever. But is the client going to be comfortable with those limitations that you've set up for your firm in order to take the limited scope case? And that's something you need to find out from the beginning as well, whether they're expecting to meet with you in person, even though it's an unbundled case, multiple times, or will they use these methods that will be more cost effective for you? Will the client consent to the limited representation? And part of consenting is understanding. So this comes down to, are you educating them as to the risk-benefit of analysis of unbundled versus full service? Are they going to be able to make that determination to consent to the limited representation? And part of your educating goes along with the limited scope agreement that you're providing to them. So you want to give them a list of the steps in their case. This is how this generally falls down. Then you want to also give them the ability to compare full service representation to limited scope services, so that they can see, all right, because they don't know. Maybe they don't know the difference between, okay, if I got a divorce full service, what would I be getting full service versus what am I getting unbundled? So make that comparison to them, but then also help them understand the risk of then going on themselves to continue the case. And especially in this limited scope agreement, you want to list clearly what services you will not be providing, and almost in a checklist format, give them what they are going to be responsible for. And that, again, goes toward avoiding misunderstandings or false expectations down the line. It really is about, I think a key component of unbundling is about educating your client and keeping digital records of your interactions. Everything from the initial conversations to the instructions. And I know this is best practices for any law firm, not necessarily one that's unbundling, but I think it's even more important for unbundling because the instructions that you've given them have to be taken and to complete their legal matter. So you need to make sure you've given them instructions and deadlines and checklists so that they can follow through, and you have a record of that. Just as important is to have a letter of termination of the representation so the client knows exactly what they've paid for and when that representation ends. And that can be in digital format, or it can be in a traditional letter, however you're structuring the delivery of the online of the unbundled services, but it needs to be clear that this is where my representation stopped, and put that in a letter so that they know and they can see what they've paid for. And this is where I want to jump to some sample case studies to give you an idea. So this is my website. I have a virtual office, and I unbundle estate planning and small business law services to my clients. And what I do is I provide them with sample pricing, which is something that you might also want to consider doing. And here I lay out specifically, this is what you're going to get in this package. And of course, once they register online, I have a very detailed limited scope engagement agreement that is in the form of a digital click wrap agreement. But initially, this lets them look and see, okay, this is what I'm going to get, and this is the estimated price, and then they can go to me and request a price quote. And I list my prices online, which I think can be a good marketing strategy for a web-based virtual office that's unbundling. because it lets them, I mean, they're going online looking for legal services. They're comparing it, potentially, your services with LegalZoom's, even though you have the attorney review component and can potentially provide much higher quality services, but they are comparing it. Let's be frank, they're going on review sites and Avvo and Yelp and finding reviews from other consumers online. So they're shopping for attorneys on there. So having sample pricing kind of helps them to see what make that decision to go ahead and register with you based on what they're looking for. And this is a sample practice. I'll go to his virtual office and see how he unbundles. This is Rice Family Law. It's an established family law practice. And they have an interesting structure of unbundling services where they use the technology to unbundle both for their existing in-person clients and then for a completely online client base. So the technology, can be used for both purposes. And this is a family law firm that's been around, I don't know, 25, 30 years. It's pretty established. And they do a lot of family law litigation. That seems to be their bread and butter. And they can use the unbundling to work with their clients. They work with their clients online with it, and then they can also use this offering of online legal services unbundled to convert potentially more clients into full-service clients. So that's a marketing strategy we're seeing right now is that law firms will post different unbundling options. So maybe it's free legal forms on their website or a web calculator or some other form of unbundling of services for free even, and then using that to draw in those prospective clients looking for unbundled services. They then are able to convert a significant number of them into full-service clients that come into their office, or they work with them online if they have a virtual office. So there are a lot of different ways to use unbundling almost as a way to be competitive in this type of market with consumers looking for the unbundled option. This is another example of a firm that handles collaborative law. I mentioned that was a form of unbundling family law. And I believe they have a traditional firm structure, so you're not, you can see down here in their practice areas, they offer unbundled services. So they're not necessarily web-based, but you can handle the divorce, mediation, different types of unbundled family law services. And they're in Denver, Colorado. This is Axiom Law. This is sort of a unique law firm, a larger law firm structure. They unbundle complex matters. They unbundle, I believe it's business litigation matters. And they are a type of virtual law firm, but they do meet with their clients in person as well as through a client extranet. But this is another example of a larger firm, not necessarily a small firm, that's finding ways to unbundle in addition to their traditional full-service work. This is a New York, I believe, firm, and they do online legal documents, and they do unbundling as well, but they have a full-service firm. So again, they're cultivating almost two separate client bases, one of unbundled clients and another one that's of in-person clients. So an additional stream of revenue. What I want to do now is kind of go through a checklist that I have. Pop this up here for your firm that you should go through before you decide, okay, we're going to unbundle. So the first thing you want to do is review your rules and regulations regarding unbundled services. And when you're searching, and state bars are. Some of the state bars are notoriously bad about providing easy access, easily searchable access to their ethics, opinions, and rules. So some of the keywords you might want to look for are unbundled, discrete task representation, assisting the pro se litigant is another one, a way that it's termed a lot in the state ethics opinions. So you might want to put in those keywords to help you find those rules and regulations, because sometimes they're a little bit couched and they may be older. So after you've determined, okay, so our state approves of unbundling, actually even it seems more state bars in the last year, 2 or 3 even, or more have come out, with modified that model rule 1.2c to encourage unbundling. So this is something that most state bars are encouraging. So you find out those rules and regulations from the state bar, then figure out what service your firm provides that maybe they can unbundle, and what services you want to provide unbundled. Is it a separate practice area, kind of as an amenity to that primary practice area, or so let's say you do corporate law, maybe you want to unbundle some IP services, or, for example, I used to work for a firm that did commercial real estate. We would sometimes unbundle matters for them on the side that were related to services that the owners of those businesses might be interested in having unbundled. So there's different combinations, but determine what services you want to offer. Then where are you going to draw the line when the issues become too complex? So how are you going to determine what's too complex for your firm to handle? And this kind of has to play into whether you're going to be a traditional firm unbundling, or you're going to be taking the unbundling component online. Because with online unbundling, you're going to have to draw that line a little differently than you would if they could come into your office for the unbundling process. So again, if you're going to unbundle divorces, are you going to draw the line when there's complex child custody disputes involved? Just do no contest divorces. Where's that line going to be? And decide that ahead of time, and reevaluate on a case-by-case basis, but have sort of a stance for your firm. Then what is your target client base for unbundled services? What type of services, what type of clients are you expecting to pull in with these additional offerings? Is it going to be cost-effective for the firm to work with them? And part of that cost-effective component is, are you going to use technology to make it more cost-effective to work with that type of client? And the services that you're offering, is this going to be something existing clients would find useful, or are you going to try and cultivate a completely separate, unbundled online client base? And I showed you that Rice Law as a case study. His firm's very interesting because he unbundles family law services online for military stationed overseas, which I think is a really unique client base, that he's found a need for that type of security. So he's got his regular in-person family law clients, and he does litigation and around that area, but then he also has that separate client base that is unbundled, and it's for the military stationed overseas. So I think that's just an example of how you really can target your client base for unbundled services. So then you want to determine well, how are we going to bill for clients? What are the billing options going to be in the pricing? We're going to do these alternative fee arrangements, fixed fee, value billing. Like I mentioned, it really lends itself well to unbundling. But you have to understand, too, if you're going to do what I do and publish sample pricing on your website, how are your full-service clients going to respond to that when they see those unbundled prices? I have heard there's a larger firm that I spoke with that did that for a while. They thought, well, we'll just put the unbundled sample pricing up here, and it didn't work for them because their existing clients would then come in with that, hey, we saw this on your website. How come we're paying this in billable hour and this person's paying that? And they don't understand the difference between full service and unbundled. So figure out if it's going to be a good idea to put that sample pricing up there, if it's going to be something that's going to be a hassle to deal with. And then, are you going to take retainers for the unbundled services? If your firm has a rule of always taking upfront retainers before you work, how are you going to do that with the unbundled clients? How are you going to do that if it's fixed fee? Are you going to require it? Is it going to be maybe less than you would for full service clients? And consider finding a good third-party credit processing company that can help you provide those unbundled clients with the ability to pay by credit card online. That will appeal to that do-it-yourself client, being able to take control and go online and pay for the invoices. And of course, you want to make sure those consistent with any trust accounting or IOTA rules or regulations with your state bar. But that'd be something else to decide in terms of structuring how you're going to bill for unbundled services. Now, I want to encourage you to consider doing unbundling with pro bono or low bono clients. Most of us devote a portion of our practice to pro bono work, so look into legal aid and see if they will take volunteers who will provide unbundled cases or who will work low bono with pro se litigants. Maybe they could be a source of referrals for this type of practice. But I just wanted to throw that out there too. Consider what portion of your unbundling practice you might be able to devote to that. Two, think about what the startup cost is going to be to integrate some kind of technology that's going to help you streamline this process. So do you want to have a virtual law office where you unbundle online? Are you going to focus on the document automation and assembly programs? Maybe sort of a combination of the methods to deliver unbundled services. But then also figure out, if you have a traditional firm, how are you going to use the technology you've chosen to unbundle for your existing in-person clients? How can you use it, get the most use out of it for both types of clients? And still somehow keep those processes separate so that you're making sure that you're doing that limited scope agreement for those unbundled clients and keeping those processes separated. So then figure out how you might want to integrate unbundled services as part of the marketing strategy for your firm. And I mentioned the larger firms are now offering these types of services, even some free, like forms and web calculators on their website, as a way to market, to have a competitive advantage over other firms that aren't providing that type of content online. So see if there's not a way that you can integrate it into your existing strategies. But that's only if you want to sort of market to a separate unbundled client base, or do you want to build, just provide the unbundled clients for your existing target market? It might be a good idea, too, to have your law firm appoint a firm member who's going to be responsible for following up with the unbundled clients, just to make sure they follow the instructions, follow the checklist, that you've got that termination letter for them at the end of the process. Somebody to keep a check on the end of that, the finalization of their legal matter, just for your own protection, but also just good customer service to follow up. So have someone in the firm who's responsible for that, whether it's another associate or it's a virtual assistant or paralegal. So after you've determined that structure of how you're going to unbundle in your firm and set it up, then I think for each individual service area where you're going to unbundle, go ahead and set up the process for that unbundled package ahead of time. And I showed you my website where I have that, like a estate planning package. And I have, the different processes I go through, the client intake form for that particular service, the limited scope engagement agreement for that service, what I charge for that. Set up all those within each service you're going to offer. So draft the limited scope engagement agreement. You can always modify it based on case-by-case basis, but have a standard template for that unbundled service. Set up educational comparison charts. So this is what you get in a full-service firm. This is what you get unbundled. So the clients will have that educational material for each time you do this service. Create checklists and instructions for them on that particular service so they'll be able to follow through. And again, these things can all be modified on a case-by-case basis, but having this set up ahead of time really will make it more efficient for you to unbundle. Set up any templates that you have that are within document automation and assembly tools. And this may take some time, which is why you want to do it before you really start unbundling. So go ahead, especially if you have a virtual law office or using any type of technology like that, create create those automated messages and the process that walks that unbundled client through step by step. You also want to go ahead and draft a termination or completion letter. Make sure you have that standard template ahead of time because you're going to need it. And make sure there's no continuing expectations the client may have. And then finally, you want to make sure your firm has a standard letter declining representation because you don't want, even if there's a prospective unbundled client in person or online that may believe for some reason you're going to represent them, you want to go ahead and have a letter declining to represent the client in those unbundled services. So those are just some good, I think, preparation work if you're going to integrate this type of unbundled service into your law firm practice. So where do I see the future of unbundling in legal services? And this will be our conclusion here, and then I'll ask for questions. But I think that clearly we're seeing that the delivery of legal services is going to be more online in the future. And this is sort of like a train that you really can't stop at this point. And it's consumer-driven largely. And there's always going to be a need for traditional brick-and-mortar law offices. Clients are there's always going to be that client that wants to meet with the attorney in person, face-to-face. And there's always matters that are not appropriate for unbundling. Complex litigation, criminal defense work. I mean, I can think of several areas where it's just not going to be a good decision to unbundle. But more and more we're going to see this delivery take place online for different types of practice areas. And really we're going to see, too, that law firm websites, and I mean every law firm these days has a website, but right now most of them are just passive, meaning they just have content on them, maybe it's educational. We're going to see more and more move to interactive websites. So maybe it's a full-blown virtual law office with a client portal. Maybe it's just a web calculator or free, some kind of doc assembly program where the prospective clients are able to walk through and have legal forms created for free, and then they can turn to the attorney for the guidance. There are a lot of different options, but we can see that it's moving from passive firm websites into more active. And I think that we're going to see more unbundled play into that online delivery as well. And I wouldn't necessarily call LegalZoom a competitor, because I don't think we are competing with LegalZoom. I think there's room in the legal marketplace for all different types of alternative forms of delivery. So I think they meet a need with a particular individual, but the consumer is going to be questioning why legal professionals, licensed professionals, are not also using technology to make this more efficient, more affordable, and why, so we really need to step up to the plate to provide this kind of service for our clients, for the public, and I really see that that's the way it's going. So it's important that regardless of what kind of law firm structure you have, where it's a traditional, medium-sized brick-and-mortar law practice to completely web-based virtual law office, you're going to have to adapt to keep up with this market. And here are some resources for you to follow up on this topic. The ABA has an Unbundled Resource Center that has some wonderful white papers posted on it. The ABA has a standing committee on the delivery of legal services, which published a white paper. I think it came out November of 2010. Or may have been 2009, but it's a wonderful paper that basically they did a report that goes around state by state to find out how different states are handling unbundling. And so it's a really good state-by-state analysis of how lawyers are unbundling and working with pro se litigants specifically. The ABA has their section of litigation in 2003 published a handbook on limited scope assistance, and it also provides, best practices for unbundling. And then the ABA e-lawyering task force, of which I'm a member, has a wonderful website where we have some white papers, including the minimum guidelines for the delivery of legal services online. We're working on the draft guidelines for cloud computing and law practice management, which should be posted on there at some point. But there are a lot of good resources on there if you're thinking of unbundling and using technology to do so, or e-lawyering to unbundle. So those are just a couple of different resources. And I want to ask now if there are any questions. And if you're not comfortable asking online, I'm more than happy to address your questions. I just wrote an ebook on this topic, so I'm sort of immersed in the state-by-state ethics rules on unbundling. So if anyone wants to shoot me a question maybe about their specific state, I'd be happy to address that.
And we would encourage everybody to absolutely check out Stephanie's blog at virtuallawpractice.org. Follow her on Twitter at Steph Kimbro is her name there, and her email is slk@kimbrolaw.com. We do have a couple of quick questions. The first is, in your field of family law, what kind of pushback, if any, do you see from full-service folks, or are you mostly in a different market so they don't necessarily see you as a threat?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I don't do family law. I'm doing estate planning and small business, but I know what you're talking about because when I first started doing this, I'm going on 6 years now, there was quite a pushback from traditional family law and estate planning attorneys about unbundling and about especially unbundling online, which is what I do. I think there's different critics of unbundling, and the critics tend to say, well, everybody is entitled to full service representation, and unbundling is somehow, providing a client with a lesser service. Yeah, it'd be great if everyone could get full service, could afford full service representation, but that just doesn't seem realistic to me. And in the meantime, there are folks who could really use unbundled assistance, better than nothing, right? And I think the other thing I would hear from critics is, well, you get what you pay for, and implying that somehow, unbundling services when they're delivered are a lower standard of legal services, and I think that's absolutely not true. It's still the same high level of expertise and of quality that you're delivering to the client unbundled. It's just a different scope. You're empowering them to take what you give them and complete their legal matter on their own. So I did get a little bit of a pushback from the traditional firms, but I think it was more that they were sort of unaware of what unbundling was, unaware of what virtual delivery was, and now, almost 6 years into it, I'm seeing a lot more acceptance and a lot more firms looking at doing it themselves because they realize, hey, to stay competitive with these other firms, we kind of have to.
And we actually have Dawn Bowie, who is a VLO user and virtual practitioner on the line. She offered to comment on this comment as well.
Wonderful.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Dawn, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you, Chelsea?
I'm great, Dawn. Good to hear your voice.
Well, my practice, as you know, is strictly family. I think so far I'm still in the pat on the head phase of the pushback from established family law firms. I think the jurisdiction in which I primarily practice, where my offices are located, is the only one in Maryland where we have boutique-only family law firms. So even in the larger cities like Baltimore and so on, they may have family divisions, but they don't have boutique firms. And we also are in a location where income is, in my county, probably one of the top income locations in the United States. So I think that there's a lot of desire to keep things the same. I know one of my colleagues that practices both in D.C. and Maryland bills at $780 an hour. That's tough to let go of for a lot of people, and that's kind of been the standard. That's what it means to succeed. I was interested in the comment of you get what you pay for. I think there's sort of a sense that this is not actually quality legal services. State of Maryland is considering rules right now that have to do with unbundling services, and I'm going to be part of a panel discussing that in June at the State Bar Convention. But I think it's still too new for anyone to consider, any one of the established firms, the bigger firms, to really consider it as much of a threat, at least so far.
Well, and that brings up an additional question from a listener as well. Stephanie and Dawn, if you could look into your crystal ball, we're amidst this massive shift and change in the legal industry, especially on the consumer side in the area of unbundling. Where do you see the industry 2 to 3 years from now, given that the technology is accelerating everyone at a very rapid pace, and we're all kind of trying to catch up or get ahead of that curve?
Stephanie, you've got way more research than I do.
Yeah, I think that in order to, like I said, to stay competitive in the next 5 to 10 years, every firm is going to have to come up with a way to provide this service because the consumers are going to be asking for it. Again, I think it's largely consumer-driven, the way it's headed. I don't know, Dawn, what do you think?
I really was interested in your featuring Axiom's website. I think that's where we're going. Yeah. I think we have to have the flexibility to keep we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we want some of the good things of full service representation. I definitely think the trend to value pricing is where we're going. In family, I think there will always be a very narrow margin of clients who are extremely wealthy who want and need the kind of services that the traditional boutique firms offer. Frankly, in my experience, that's not the client base I'm really appealing to. But I think that the flexibility is we're going to have to combine both the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And I think value pricing and unbundled services can actually work together very effectively for those of us who want to use them.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely agree, and I'm very excited to be, part of this group, and it's so exciting every day working with attorneys like Dawn and Stephanie, really helping shape the direction that we're going and establish best practices and give guidance to the rest of us that are interested. And I think those types of resources are going to be helpful for everyone who's moving in this direction, and even those that are considering it.
Well, I want to thank you both for taking my input, especially this webinar thing. I'm in the process of redoing my own website, and one of the problems I have with unbundled services and more virtual interaction with clients is it's hard to balance out personal contact with clients. They really want that before they hire you. So your use of Total Attorney's use of this webinar is fantastic. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, we're very happy that we could share our insights with you, and Stephanie has always been so generous with her time and everything that she's learned over the last 6 years of practicing virtually. Stephanie, thank you so much. Dawn, we really appreciate your insights. Thank you to everybody who has joined us for today's session. You will receive a recap email that will reach you early next week that includes a link to watch this presentation over again and an optional survey that helps us create more sessions that are applicable to things that you'd like to learn about. If you have an idea for a session or any questions for the host, you can always email us at powerchat@totalattorneys.com. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us today. Thanks again, Stephanie, and we'll talk to you on the next Total Attorneys Power Chat.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.